What is the weirdest, most disturbing fact about our world's history that you know? There are books in the Harvard University library which are bound in human flesh. I have a skeleton like that. The Mayans partied hard. They would take alcohol and hallucinogenic enemas. In social studies they had us watch a special on them, and I vividly remember an artist's rendering of a Mayan doing a handstand while getting an enema. The original keg stand. Rainbow Valley of Mount Everest is named for the rainbow colors of clothing of dead people there. So I knew this fact. Then one day I watched a video of someone passing by the body's whole new level creepy. Green boots just looked like a guy napping. Mary Toft reportedly gave birth to up to 9 rabbits at a time. Doctors were convinced that she was telling the truth until they found pieces of corn inside the stomach of one of the rabbits, proving that it hadn't developed inside Toft's womb. It turned out that she had been manually inserting the rabbits to make the delivery look as realistic as possible. Oh, that's all folks. Persians used to tie cats to their shields during the war with Egypt cause it was against Egyptian law to kill cats. It was a double-edged blade. On one hand, you had a tactical advantage because the Egyptians would try not to hit the cat due to cats being a holy animal, but because they were using cats as shields the Egyptians probably wouldn't show them any mercy and have more motivation to kill them. Most people have 16 great-great-parents. Cleopatra had 2. She's lucky to have developed working lungs, let alone be competent enough to accomplish anything. That was a family tree was a wreath. And half the Roman government was like, "Lem, have a piece of that Nile jewel. Thank you very much." I mean, they were literally gold diggers. Doesn't much matter how she looks if her dowry is one of the richest places on earth. On top of that, Rome itself relied on grain subsidies, most of those coming from Egypt. A politician who controlled the grain controlled the common folk of Rome. It's hard to resist the guy who can just order a few thousand angry plebs to lynch you. Read a letter from an officer to his wife in the Swedish army during the 30 Years' War. "We came upon the town and beat to death all the men, but not the women and children. Those were beaten to death by the Finns." Sweden Trunklink Swedish drink was a torture method in the 30 Years' War, where the victim was tied down and forced to drink large amounts liquid manure. During World War I on the Eastern Front, Germany and Russia were going at it in one battle when German troops deployed mustard gas against the Russian troops who were advancing. The Russian troops emerged from the gas smoke throwing up blood leaking from their nose, eyes. Their skin turned yellow and pale. They looked like undead soldiers, literal zombies. The German troops were so frightened that they abandoned their positions and retreated. It was called the Attack of the Dead Men. Took place on August 6, 1915. There is nothing scarier than fighting an enemy who is not afraid to die. The Russians knew they were gonna die, so they might as well fight to their last breath. That we've been on the brink of a global nuclear exchange several times, and that in one case Cuban blockade. It was only because a single man Vasily Arkhipov disagreed with standing orders that a nuclear exchange was likely averted, or the time when there was a false alert of a nuclear launch and the Russian guy in charge didn't send an alert to send nukes as a counterattack. We came close to killing a lot of people with nuclear bomb. Even funnier is when the US dropped multiple nuclear bombs by accident for the duration of the Cold War. The bodies buried beneath John Wayne Gacy's house were crammed together so tightly, the bones fused together, and it took over 2 years to separate all the bodies. I keep trying to wrap my head around this, and just can't make sense of it. Wouldn't they originally have more volume when the flesh was still on, thereby having more room for the skeletons themselves after decomposition? What would chemically cause bones to fuse? I've never heard of this before. The conquests of Timur used terror as a way of discouraging revolts. After capturing a city, building literal towers of heads, cementing people in the city walls they were defending, or instructing his soldiers to return to camp with 2 severed heads. When the soldiers ran out of citizens to decapitate, they would turn to POWs and after that, their wives. Most people are familiar that the likes of Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar or Napoleon existed, but not as much people know about Timur. He wasn't only arguably as successful as a military commander, but also just a really scary dude. He also really liked pillaging Georgia. Like nearly every campaign he goes, he just finishes it with pillaging Georgia. Weird. Not the most disturbing, but weird nevertheless. Back in the 19th century, a carnival was headed through the next town over. And during the stop, a hippopotamus went nuts and started killing people and livestock. Ever since then, the town has taken the hippo as its mascot because it's such a ferocious animal. That's the one animal Steve Iwin did not mess with either, because they were so unpredictable and scary. Most disturbing has to be the details of the Rape of Ninjing. Toshiaki Muke and Tsuyoshi Noda were officers that had a bet on who would be the first to kill 100 by sword. They both surpassed that number in a day. 20,000 women and girls were raped. 60,000 civilians were massacred after the city of Nanking was captured. It is one of the most shockingly brutal events in history. Some people actually resorted to selling their kids during the Great Depression. Link. If I remember correctly, there are pictures from the Holodomor Ukrainian famine of 2 adults selling human flesh. I don't know why selling kids immediately made me think of that. I think I remember reading that it was the couple's children that they butchered for the meat. Link. It's a site in Africa where stone tools dating back 3.3 million years were found. That is about 500,000 years older than our own genus, meaning earlier hominids had a very long time to form their own crude societies before our nearest ancestors even existed. I would like to see the smartest person of each major era throughout history get together and see what they come up with, from the smartest caveman to smartest modern person. From the fall of the Roman Empire up until the mid-19th century, not a single city in Europe had a sewer system to dispose of human feces. City planners didn't build sewers until it was proven in 1855 that the cause for all the cholera epidemics was drinking water contaminated by human feces. Anytime I watch a movie from this time period like Gangs of New York or a documentary around 1776, I fail in not thinking to myself, man, everybody in this situation smells like pure shit. The brutality of many Japanese units in World War II. We know about the Rape of Nanking, but it goes beyond that. Bloodlust at levels not regularly seen in war. Taking infants and bashing their heads against trees. Not just a few, but dozens and hundreds. To save bullets, and because why not? Other armies certainly had body count contests among soldiers, but this is different in my opinion. The disregard for humanity amongst the common rank and file was pretty next level. Additionally, there are accounts of POW liver being served at Japanese officer parties as a delicacy. Pretty wild that it was only 80 years ago. Not so much disturbing as it is funny, at least to me. The Kettle War. Long story short, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Netherlands, the 7 republics of the Netherlands, were beefing. One boat from Spain engaged in a fight with a Dutch naval ship. One shot was fired. The only victim of that cannonball was a pot of soup that was cooking. The Spanish ship then surrendered. Some ancient cultures knew that they could control population growth by denying fertile females both fats and carbohydrates. This process guaranteed that embryos would not mature in the womb due to the lack of food energy derived from carrying mothers. The embryos would self-abort. A certain ratio of body fat is required for successful pregnancies. Harass cannibals and kings. There is a cemetery in a town in Norway, I might be wrong on the country, that hasn't been used since the 20s and cannot be used because the bodies never fully decomposed and still hold the Black Plague. What's it called? It is in Svalbard. To be more specific, Longyearbyen. And it's actually the 1918 flu virus they found. The town stays entirely dark for roughly 4 months in the winter, resulting in permafrost, thus preventing bodies from fully decomposing. You aren't allowed to be buried there. However, cremation urns can be, not that anyone would want to step foot there. The reason why Paraguay celebrates Kids Day on a different date than Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, and Argentina is because during the Triple Alliance War, the coalition formed by Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay at the Battle of Acosta, more than 3,000 poorly armed Paraguayan militias composed mainly by children aged 9 to 15, were wiped out by 20,000 Brazilian veteran soldiers. The Allied troops met the rear guard of the Paraguayan forces at Acosta U on August 16th. The battle started at 0800. Acosta U, which means Acosta's field. Acosta being a popular last name, is a vast plain of roughly 12 km to 4.6 square miles. Ideal for the Brazilian cavalry. The initial charge was led by the Allied 1st Corps infantry, supported by artillery. As the Paraguayans retreated across the Yaguri River, the 4th Cavalry Brigade made a right flanking movement. Meanwhile, the 2nd Corps reached the Paraguayan rear, which left them no means to retreat. Children were said to cling to the legs of Brazilian soldiers amidst the raging battle, pleading for mercy, only to be decapitated without hesitation. Once all flanks collapsed, the wounded children tried to flee the battlefield alongside their relatives. Yet the Brazilian commander ordered his cavalry to cut the retreat and set the battlefield ablaze, including the field hospital. Large numbers of children died because of these actions. That's why they celebrated on a different date to commemorate this massacre. Due to fresh drinking water being so scarce on the Galapagos Islands, some bird species, such as the Galapagos hawk, have adapted by drinking the blood of other animals. I was real curious about this cause it sounds metal as duck, but I think you have the wrong bird. I couldn't find anything about the Galapagos hawk doing that, but I did find out about this finch link. The fact that the French believed a 17-year-old peasant girl that was having visions of God telling her to bring the Dauphin to Reims, and they actually listened to her, and then she goes on to lift a siege, beat the English Burgundians in multiple battles, gets the Dauphin to Reims to be crowned, and dies at the stake for cross-dressing. Joan of Arc was lit. In the siege of Leningrad from 1941 to 1944, the population fell from 2.5 million to 800,000. For 827 days the people of Leningrad were bombarded with artillery and cut off from the outside world. 827 days of bombing, destitution and starvation, without any news from the outside. No wood or gas or coal or food was coming into the city, and when the 40°C winter hit, people had to burn most of their possessions. People froze to death outside after their homes were destroyed by artillery. Women prostituted themselves to soldiers and party members, as only the people crucial to the city's defense were receiving rations. Even those rations were a meager 125 grams a day, unless you were a party member. Starvation got to such a point that a black market for human meat started up. After all the dogs, cats and rats had been eaten, people wouldn't go out at night, or alone at all. People would leave their homes to go find food, and never come back. But whenever people disappeared, there'd be more meat at the market, labeled dog meat or horse meat. There are stories of people eating their own children. Leningrad survivor and author Daniel Grunin described how a mother fed her dead child to her surviving child. To keep her alive, a child died. He was just 3 years old. His mother laid the body inside the double glazed window and sliced off a piece of him every day to feed her second child, a daughter. This is how she got her. Though 2,000 cases of cannibalism during the siege are recorded officially, but the real number is probably much higher. In the first spring season of the siege, the city's remaining officials ordered a cleanup of the bodies and fesses that were scattered around and piled up in courtyards. Crime was rampant and families ripped themselves apart with murder and theft over rations. The stress and starvation allegedly caused children to grow beards and be called the little old people. The physiological effects of the siege are only comparable to those of Holocaust survivors. Everyone is shriveled, their breasts sunken in, their stomachs enormous, and instead of arms and legs, just bones poke out through wrinkles, wrote Leningrader Alexandra Lyubovkaya. However, there were people in the city with food, lots of it. Members of the Communist Party or Council, Soviets, hoarded what little food that did come into the city through the frozen lake route. Nikolai Rubkovsky recorded in his journal that he ate goose and caviar at the party cafeteria, while on average 900 people starved or froze to death in the city a day. The US government has a literal gigantic dossier of classified operations hidden from the public. No brainer. What's shocking are things they've actually declassified. Among these documents is the detailing of one of the largest human experiments in history, when the US dropped a bacteria-infused fog on the city of San Francisco to test how well germ-based biological warfare could prove by masking it with natural fog, which occurred back in the 1950s. It was widely successful. A specific case is that of Edward Nevin, who died from Serratia marcescens, a bacteria that makes bread turn red. It had spread to his heart from a UTI and killed him. In 1977, the government released a thoroughly detailed report at the testament of Nevin's grandson. Nevin's grandson tried to sue the government for wrongful death, but the court held that the government was immune to a lawsuit for negligence and that they were justified in conducting tests without subjects' knowledge. According to the Wall Street Journal, the army stated that infections must have occurred inside the hospital, and the US attorney argued that they had to conduct tests in a populated area to see how a biological agent would affect that area. Imagine what they're hiding. Not necessarily weird, but more Christians were murdered by fellow Christians in a span of 24 hours during one of the Crusades than Christians were murdered by the Roman Empire during all of its existence. The Albigensian Crusade. Kill them all. God will know his own. Ho Chi Minh was an OSS intelligence asset during the Japanese occupation of Indochina. He was almost executed by nationalist Chinese in 1943 for promoting Leninist teachings in southern China, until Washington threatened to withdraw American support for Chiang Kai-shek. You made the man what he was, and gave him the resources to throw off the Japanese, French and Americans. Wait until you realize he quoted the Declaration of Independence in his acceptance speech as Vietnamese president. Weird but not disturbing. In 1859, on St. Juan Island in modern Washington state, an American killed a pig because it was ruining his garden. The pig belonged to an Irishman who worked for the Hudson Bay Company. The British demanded he be arrested, but he fled and sought support from the other American settlers. At the time, relationships were kinda hot between the two countries, at least in the local area, because the border between Canada and Washington hadn't finished. The St. Juan Islands were kinda contested territory. Things began to escalate, resulting in both sides sending forces to occupy the island. The British even brought 3 warships. Before anyone could fire a shot, news of the event had reached London and DC, and both agreed everyone needed to chill out. The island continued to be jointly occupied till the 1870s, when the border was solidified. They had even built forts on opposite sides of the island. But relations between the men were fairly friendly. They'd often compete against one another in sporting events and celebrated holidays together. Too long didn't read the US and UK could have, but not really, gone to war over a dead pig. It was really a territorial dispute.